The morning I buried my husband, I found a key I had never seen before, taped to the underside of his desk drawer. I was 74 years old, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about the man I had shared a bed with for 49 years. I was wrong. That little brass key opened a box, and that box held 30 years of letters, all written in his hand, all addressed to a woman whose name I did not recognize. I want to tell you what those letters said. But first, I need you to understand who we were, because if you had asked me the day before the funeral whether Harold kept secrets, I would have laughed in your face. My name is Eleanor. Everybody who has known me longer than a week calls me Nell. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where the loudest thing that ever happened was the church bell on Sunday. And I married Harold Bishop in the spring of 1974, the same year the roses along the fence finally took. He was a quiet man. He was the kind of quiet that people mistake for simple. And they are wrong about that too, because still water is not empty water. Harold worked 41 years at the same insurance office downtown, wore the same brown coat until the elbows gave out, and never once, in all the years I knew him, raised his voice at me. We had 2 children. Our daughter, Ruth, lives 3 states away and calls every Sunday at 6. Our son, Daniel, we lost when he was 19, in a car on a wet road. And I will not pretend the rest of this story is not colored by that. Harold and I grieved him in different rooms. That is the truth nobody tells you about losing a child. You do not fall into each other's arms, you fall away from each other, each of you carrying a version of the boy the other one cannot reach. We came back together slowly over years. But I always felt that some door in Harold had closed the day we buried Daniel, and no matter how gently I knocked, it never opened again. I told myself that door was grief. I understood grief. I did not push. Now I know I should have pushed. Harold died on a Tuesday in October. It was his heart, and it was fast. And the doctors told me afterward that he likely felt very little, as if that was supposed to be a comfort. He had gone out to the garage to look for the good ladder, because the gutters needed clearing, and I found him sitting on the step, with his hand pressed to his chest, and a look on his face I had never seen before. Not fear, I keep coming back to that. It was not fear. It was something closer to recognition, as if he had been expecting a visitor for a long time, and the visitor had finally come. The funeral was small. Harold would have wanted small. Ruth flew in with her husband and stood beside me at the front of the church in a black dress I had never seen. And afterward, there were casseroles, and there were neighbors, and there was that terrible quiet that comes down over a house when everyone finally leaves, and it is just you, and the ticking of a clock you never noticed before. It was 3 days after we put him in the ground that I found the key. I had gone into a study to look for the deed to the cemetery plot because there were papers the funeral home needed, and Harold kept everything in that room. He had a roll-top desk that had belonged to his own father, a heavy old thing of dark oak, and I had been in and out of that desk 100 times over the years, looking for stamps or checkbooks or the little scissors that were always going missing. I knew that desk. Or I thought I did. The bottom drawer stuck the way it always stuck, and I gave it the hard pull it always needed, and this time it came all the way out and clattered to the floor, and that is when I saw it. Taped to the underside of the drawer, where no hand would ever go by accident, was a small brass key. It was wrapped in a piece of masking tape gone yellow and brittle with age, and it had been there a long, long time. I sat down on the floor of my dead husband's study with that key in my palm, and I felt the first cold finger of something I could not name. You have to understand, Harold did not hide things. Harold labeled the fuse box. Harold kept the receipts for appliances we had thrown away a decade ago. A man like that does not tape a key to the bottom of a drawer unless he needs to keep something away from the one person who has the run of the house. And the only person who had the run of that house was me. It took me the better part of an hour to find what the key opened. It was not any drawer in the desk. It was not the little cabinet where he kept his good watch. I went through that study inch by inch, and I found it at last on the top shelf of the closet, behind the winter blankets, pushed all the way to the back against the wall. A metal document box, gray, the kind you buy at an office store, heavier than it should have been. The little lock on the front was the kind you could break with a screwdriver in about 4 seconds. But I did not need a screwdriver. I had the key. I want to tell you that I hesitated. I want to tell you that some loyal part of me said, Now, whatever is in this box, the man is dead. Let him keep it. But I would be lying. I had that lock open before I had finished the thought, and I lifted the lid, and inside were letters, dozens of them, maybe more than 100, bound in bundles with rubber bands that had lost their stretch, arranged by year, every one of them in Harold's small, careful, forward-leaning hands. And every single one of them began with the same two words. Dear Margaret. I did not know any Margaret. In 49 years of marriage, in a small town where I knew the name of every soul in every pew, I had never once heard my husband speak the name Margaret. Not a cousin, not a coworker, not a woman from church. Nobody. I sat down on the edge of the bed with the first bundle in my lap, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the rubber band off. The earliest letter was dated the spring of 1993. That was 30 years. 30 years my husband had been writing to a woman named Margaret. In 30 years, he had never mailed a single one of them, because there they all were, stacked and saved, never sent. I need you to sit with that the way I had to sit with it. 100 letters, written over 30 years, to a woman, and not one of them mailed. What kind of man writes into a silence like that? And who was she that he would keep writing to her for 3 decades and never once send the words? I read the first one right there on the bed. My reading glasses were down the hall, and I did not go get them. I held the paper up to the lamp, and I squinted, and I read. Dear Margaret, I do not know if you will ever read this. I am not sure I want you to. But the doctor said today that writing things down might help, and God knows nothing else has. So here I am, an old fool with a pen, talking to a woman who cannot answer. It has been 6 months. I still reach for the phone on Sundays. I still think, I have to tell Margaret before I remember. Nell does not know I come here. She thinks I go to the hardware store. I do not know how to tell her. I do not know how to tell her any of it. I read that, and my whole understanding of my marriage cracked straight down the middle. Because there it was in his own hand. Nell does not know. She thinks I go to the hardware store. All those Saturday mornings, all those years, Harold in his brown coat picking up the truck keys and saying he was headed to the hardware store, back by lunch. And I would say, bring milk. And he would bring milk. And I never, not once, wondered. I did not sleep that night. I read letters until the sky went gray in the window, and I want to walk you through what I learned, because it did not come to me all at once, and it should not come to you all at once either. The truth of Harold arrived the way it arrives in a life, in pieces, out of order, each piece changing the shape of the pieces before it. The letters were not what I thought they were. I need to say that now because I know what you are thinking, because it is what I thought too, sitting there in the dark with my heart going like a trapped bird. I thought I had found evidence of an affair. I thought Margaret was a woman my husband had loved, secretly, alongside me, for 30 years. I spent most of that first night believing my whole marriage had been a lie. And I want you to feel how heavy that was, because the truth, when it came, was heavier still, and in a way I never expected. Here's what the letters told me. Margaret was not a lover. Margaret was Harold's sister. I did not know Harold had a sister. In 49 years, he had told me he was an only child. He said it the very first night we met, at a dance in the church basement, when I asked about his family, and he looked at his shoes and said, "It's just me." I believed him. Why would I not believe him? A man knows how many siblings he has. But Harold had a sister, Margaret Bishop, 2 years older, and from what I could piece together from 30 years of letters written to her, he had loved her more than anyone on this earth. And something had happened between them, something so large that he had erased her from the story of his life and carried her instead, in a gray box on the top shelf of a closet where his wife would never look. The early letters were confessions. He wrote to her the way a man prays when he has stopped believing anyone is listening, but cannot stop the words from coming. And slowly, over pages and years, the story assembled itself in front of me. They had grown up hard. Their father drank and their mother was afraid, and Margaret, being the older one, had stood between little Harold and the worst of it, more times than she could count. She took the blame that was meant for him. She took the belt that was meant for him. When Harold was 9, he wrote, Margaret told their father a lie, a big one, to keep the old man's rage pointed at her and away from her brother, and their father put her out of the house that night in the rain, and she did not come back for 3 days. And when she came back, she never spoke of where she had been. She practically raised him. She got him to school, she fed him when there was food, and told him stories when there was not. And then, when Margaret was 19 and Harold was 17, there was a fire. I read this part 3 times before I could take it in. There was a fire in the house they grew up in. It started in the night in the kitchen, from the old man's carelessness with a cigarette and a bottle. Harold got out, their parents got out, Margaret did not. Except she did. This is the part that undid me. Margaret did not die in that fire. She was badly burned, her hands and one side of her face, and she spent months in the county hospital. And Harold, who was 17 and full of a guilt he could not carry, did a thing that he spent the rest of his life apologizing for in letters he never sent. He blamed her. In the raw, stupid, unbearable grief of being alive when he thought she should have gotten out first. In the shame of a boy who had run and not gone back, he told her, in the hospital, with the bandages still on her, that it should have been him. And she said, in a voice ruined by smoke, "No, Harold, it should have been neither of us." And he could not bear the kindness of it, and he ran again. Not from a fire this time, from her. He left home at 18. He changed towns. He told the next people he met that he was an only child, and then he told the next. And then he met a girl named Nell at a dance in a church basement, and told her too. And by then the lie had worn a groove so deep he could not climb out of it. That is what he wrote. I could not climb out of it, Margaret. Every year the lie got older and heavier, and I loved Nell, and I could not find the door where I would tell her, I have a sister. She is alive. I left her burned in a hospital bed, and I never went back. 30 years of Saturdays. That is what the hardware store was. In 1993, when the letters began, Harold had finally, at the age of 40-something, gotten in the truck and driven the 2 hours to the town where they grew up, and he had found out that Margaret was still alive. She was in a care home. She had never married. She had worked her whole life as a seamstress, doing alterations, her scarred hands somehow still gentle with a needle. And she had asked after her brother for years, and been told by their mother, before the mother died, that Harold wanted nothing to do with any of them. That was a lie, too. But it was not Harold's lie. And by the time he learned of it, so much time had gone by that he did what he always did with things too big to face. He wrote it down instead of living it. He visited her. That is what the Saturdays were, not everyone, but many, for 30 years. He drove 2 hours, sat with his burned sister in a room that smelled of the care home, and he could not tell me because telling me meant admitting he had lied to me on the first night we met and every day after. And so, he told Margaret about me instead. The letters were full of me. Nell planted tomatoes today, and I did not have the heart to tell her the soil is too wet. Nell laughed at something on the television, and for a second, she looked like the girl at the dance. Nell is worried about money, and I have not told her about the extra I've been putting aside. And Margaret, do you understand? The extra was for you. It was always for you. I have been paying what I can toward her care and calling it insurance business, so Nell will not ask. The money. Dear God, the money. For years I had wondered, quietly, where a little of it went. Not enough to accuse, just enough to notice, the way you notice a clock is slow. And I had made my peace with never knowing, the way a wife does, and here it was. He had been paying for his sister's care, for decades, in secret, because the shame of the secret had grown larger than his love for me. Or maybe because he thought protecting me from the ugliness of his past was the same thing as loving me. Men of his generation confuse those two things all the time. There were letters in that box that I will carry to my own grave, and I want to give you a few of them because a summary is a cold thing, and these were not cold. In the spring of 1997, he wrote, Margaret, I taught Daniel to drive today in the church parking lot, and he ground the gears so bad I thought he would strip them clean, and he laughed that laugh. And I had to turn my face to the window because, for 1 second, he sounded exactly like you did before the fire took the music out of your voice. You would love him. He is stubborn like you. He argues with me about everything, and he is usually right, and I never tell him so. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, and I read my dead son's name in my dead husband's handwriting, in a letter to a sister I never knew existed. And I understood that Harold had been introducing his family to each other on paper for 30 years, one at a time, in a language only he could read. After we lost Daniel, the letters changed. They got shorter, they got angrier, and then they got so quiet they were barely there at all. In the winter after the funeral, he wrote only one line the whole season. Margaret, I do not know how to be a father to a boy who is gone, or a husband to a woman who is drowning. So I am going to the hardware store, and I am so sorry, and I do not know what else to do. And I remembered that winter. I remembered thinking Harold had gone cold on me, that he did not grieve our boy, that he escaped into errands while I fell apart in the kitchen. I had been angry at him for 20 years for that winter. And here, on a brittle piece of paper, was the truth. He had not gone cold. He had driven 2 hours to sit with the one person who had ever taught him how to survive a house on fire. And he had asked her, in effect, how do I keep my wife alive? And he had come home, and he had kept me alive, and he had never once let me see how close he was to breaking himself. I found things pressed between the pages, too. A dried flower, a black-eyed Susan, gone to paper and dust. A photograph, the only one, of 2 children on a porch step, a skinny boy of maybe 8 squinting into the sun, and a girl behind him with her hands on his shoulders, both of them in clothes that had been mended more than made. On the back, in a young woman's hand, not Harold's, it said Harry and Margie, before. Just that, before. I stared at that word until my eyes burned. Before the fire, before the running, before the dance in the church basement, before me. There had been a whole world before me, a whole boy, a whole sister, a whole porch step in the sun, and I had lived beside its locked door for half a century and called it my husband and thought I knew him. There was a letter from 1999 that I could barely finish. Margaret, you asked me last Saturday why I have never brought Nell to meet you, and I gave you some answer about the drive, and I could see you did not believe it. And I want to tell you the truth, even though I will never say it to your face. It is not the drive. It is that Nell is the one clean thing I have ever built. She does not know the boy who ran. She married a man who told her he was an only child, and she has loved that man faithfully for 25 years. And if I bring her here, if I put her in this room, then she will know I lied to her from the very first night. And the clean thing will have a stain in it. And I am too much of a coward to watch that happen. I would rather keep 2 half-lives than risk the one whole one. God forgive me, I know it is wrong. I do it anyway. I read that and I finally understood the architecture of my own marriage. It was not that Harold did not trust me. It was that he trusted me so completely, needed the safety of me so badly, that he could not bear to be anything less than clean in my eyes. He had turned me into a church he was afraid to walk into with mud on his shoes. And so he had spent 30 years scraping his shoes at a door 2 hours away and coming home clean. And I had married a man who was always coming home clean from somewhere he could never tell me about. There were happier letters too, and I want you to have those, because I will not leave you thinking those 30 years were only sorrow. There were years when the letters read almost like a man talking to his best friend, easy and warm. He told her jokes. He told her about the garden, the good tomato years and the bad. The summer the deer got everything, and he built a fence in a rage, and Nell laughed at him the whole time. He told her about Ruth's wedding, about walking his daughter down the aisle, and he wrote, I looked out at all those faces, and there was an empty chair in my heart where you should have been. And I thought, one day I will fix this. One day, Margie, I will bring my whole life into one room, and you will be in it. He believed that. For 30 years, he believed that someday there would be time. The last third of the box was mostly about me. As they both got old, as Margaret's health failed and Harold's heart began its long, quiet countdown, the letters turned toward me almost entirely, as if he were practicing. Nell said something wise today and did not know it was wise. Nell is frightened of being alone and does not say so, and neither do I. Nell deserves to know you, Margaret. Nell deserves the whole story, and I am going to give it to her. He wrote that sentence, or something like it, a dozen times over the last 5 years, each time a little more urgent, a man arguing himself toward courage. Nell deserves the whole story. And he was right. I did deserve it. And he waited, And he waited, and his heart did not wait for him. I read until dawn, and then I made coffee I did not drink, and I sat at the kitchen table where we had eaten 49 years of breakfasts, and I tried to feel angry. I had every right to be angry. He had lied to me on the night we met. He had lied to me for half a century. He had a whole family, a whole grief, a whole sister he loved, and he had walled it off from me as if I were a stranger and not the woman who had held him the night we buried our son. But I could not find the anger. I looked for it, and what I found instead, underneath, was the worst grief of my life. Because I understood him. That was the terrible thing. I understood exactly why he did it. I had watched him fail to open the door to Daniel's grief for 30 years. I knew the shape of the man. He did not withhold to hurt. He withheld because somewhere, a long time ago, he had learned that the people you love get burned, and that it is your fault, and that the only safe thing to do with love is to carry it in a locked box on a high shelf where it cannot start another fire. The last letter in the box was dated 3 weeks before he died. I almost could not read it. My hands would not hold the paper steady. It was shorter than the others. Dear Margaret, the doctor gave me some news I am not going to write down because writing it makes it real. I've been thinking that I have run out of time to do the one brave thing. I keep composing it in my head. How I will sit Nell down and tell her everything about you, about the fire, about the Saturdays, about the money, about the lie I told at a dance in 1973 that I have been paying for every day since. I am 76 years old, and I am still that boy who ran. But I am going to tell her, Margaret. I have decided. I am going to tell her before Christmas. I want to walk into whatever comes next as a man who finally stopped hiding. Wish me courage. Your brother, Harold. He did not make it to Christmas. He made it to a Tuesday in October, and a good ladder he never found, and a step in the garage, and that look on his face that I now understood was not fear at all. It was a man who knew he had waited too long, and knew it in the last second, and could do nothing about it. I want to tell you what I did next, because this is the part that matters. This is the part I hope you carry out of this room and into your own life. I got in the truck, Harold's truck that still smelled like him, with the hardware store receipts still in the door pocket, and I drove the 2 hours to the town where my husband grew up, to a care home I found by calling the number written on the back of the last letter in his careful hand. And I asked for Margaret Bishop, and a young woman at a desk said, "Are you family?" And I opened my mouth to say no, and then I closed it, and then I said, "Yes. Yes. I am her sister-in-law. My name is Nell. I should have come a long time ago." They took me down a hall that smelled the way Harold's letters had always described, and into a small, bright room, and there by the window in a chair sat an old woman with white hair and a face that one side of time had been cruel to. And she looked up at me, and I did not have to tell her who I was. She knew. She had known me for 30 years. She had known me from 100 letters read aloud, from a brother who could not stop talking about the woman he could not tell the truth to. She said, "You must be Nell." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "He always said you had a laugh like the first warm day of spring." And I sat down in the chair beside her, and I took her ruined hands in mine, her seamstress hands, the hands that had taken the belt for a little boy 60 years ago. And I told her that her brother was gone. She already knew. Somehow she already knew. But she needed to hear it from someone who had loved him. And I needed to say it to someone who had loved him longer than I had. And we sat in that little room and we cried for the same man, the two women he had spent his whole life loving in secret and never once letting meet. I have to tell you about that drive, the first one, because I have driven it 100 times since, and none of them have been like the first. I left before dawn. I did not tell Ruth where I was going. I put the last letter on the passenger seat, the one with the phone number, and I followed the roads my husband had followed every Saturday for 30 years without me, and I understood for the first time what it meant that he knew them by heart. The turn at the grain elevator, the gas station where the letters mentioned he always bought coffee and a roll, the long, flat stretch where the fields open up and the sky gets enormous, where a man alone in a truck has 2 hours to rehearse a confession he will never make. I cried most of the way, not out of anger, out of company. For the first time since he died, I felt close to him because I was finally going where he had gone, seeing what he had seen. And it was the strangest kind of intimacy, following a dead man's route to a secret he had kept from me, and feeling, mile after mile, not betrayed, but invited. Late, but invited. And when I walked into that room and Margaret looked up and knew me, I felt the last wall in my marriage come down, quietly, without a sound. Because here was the proof of everything the letters said. She knew my laugh. She knew about the tomatoes. She knew Daniel's name and cried when I said it, and told me Harold had described the boy's funeral to her in such detail that she had grieved the nephew she never met, alone, in a care home, on a Saturday, while I grieved him 2 hours away, and neither of us had known the other was carrying the same weight. 2 women, 1 man between them, the same losses, the same love, kept apart by nothing in the world but one frightened boy's inability to say a hard, true thing out loud. I go every Saturday now. I took the Saturdays from him. I get in the truck and I drive the 2 hours, and I sit with Margaret by the window, and she tells me the Harold I never knew, the little brother, the boy who was afraid of the dark and brave about everything else. And I tell her the Harold she never got to grow old beside, the man who labeled the fuse box and brought milk when I asked, and held me the night we lost our boy. Between the 2 of us, we have almost the whole man. Almost. You never get the whole man. I know that now. I brought her the letters, all of them. I read them to her, one by one, over months, in that little bright room, 30 years of a brother's guilt and love, finally arriving at the address they were always meant for. She cried at some. She laughed at others. When I read the one where he confessed about the money, she shook her head and said, "That stubborn, stupid, wonderful man." And I said yes. And we both meant it as the highest praise a person can give. Margaret told me things too. She told me that she had never once been angry at Harold, not for the fire, not for the words in the hospital, not for the 30 years of silence before the Saturdays began. She said, "Nell, I was the one who taught him that love was dangerous. I stood in front of him his whole childhood so nothing could reach him, and I taught him too well. He learned that the way to protect the people you love is to stand between them and the truth. He was only ever doing what I taught him. How could I be angry at that?" I think about that all the time now, how the ways we try to protect the people we love can become the very cages we lock them in. Harold hid me from his sister to protect me from his shame. Margaret took Harold's punishments to protect him from pain. And both of them, out of love, out of nothing but love, built lives with a locked box on the top shelf, and both of them ran out of time to open it. I did not run out of time. That is the only grace in this whole story. He handed me the key, whether he meant to or not, by taping it where a curious wife would one day find it. Sometimes I think he meant to. Sometimes I think a man who labels the fuse box does not tape a key to a drawer by accident. That some part of Harold, the part that had decided to tell me before Christmas, made sure that if his courage failed him, if his heart gave out on a garage step, the truth would still find its way to me. I choose to believe that. On the hard days, I choose to believe my husband, in his fumbling, frightened, faithful way, left me a door. So here's what I want to say to you, whoever you are, sitting wherever you are, listening to an old woman tell a story about a box of letters. Do not wait for Christmas. Whatever the thing is that you are carrying, the truth you have folded up so small and hidden so high that you have almost convinced yourself it is not there anymore, take it down. Say it out loud to the person who deserves to hear it. Do not tell yourself you are protecting them. We are never protecting them. We are protecting ourselves from the moment of saying it. And we call that love. And it is not love, it is fear wearing love's coat. Harold loved me for 49 years, and I never doubted it for a day. That is true, and I want you to hear that it is true, because I'm not standing here telling you my marriage was a lie. It was not a lie. It was a real and good and tender marriage with a locked room in the middle of it. And I would give anything, to have had 1 hour, just one, where he took my hand and said, "Nell, I have a sister. Her name is Margaret, and I have been so afraid to tell you." I would not have loved him less. I would have loved him more. I would have driven those 2 hours with him 1,000 times. We could have grown old with her together. Daniel could have known his aunt. There was so much love in that gray box, Love that could have been spent, love that could have warmed all of us. And instead it sat on a shelf gathering dust because one frightened man could not find the door. You have the door. You are standing at it right now, whatever it is. Some of you know exactly what I mean. Some of you felt your stomach drop a few minutes ago because you have a box of your own, a secret you are keeping out of love, and you have been telling yourself there is still time. There is time, but there is not as much as you think. There is never as much as you think. Margaret passed last spring, peacefully, in the little bright room with the letters on the nightstand and my hand in hers. At the end, she was not afraid. She told me she was ready, that she had gotten to meet the woman her brother loved, that the story had come out right after all, even if it came out late. I held her ruined seamstress hands until they went still, and I thought about a 19-year-old girl standing in front of a fire, and I thought about a 17-year-old boy running from a hospital room, and I thought about how the whole long tragedy of the two of them came down, in the end, to a single thing. Not the fire, not the burns, not the lie. The waiting. The waiting was the tragedy, not what happened to them, but all the years they spent not saying it. I'm 76 now myself. I keep the letters in the same gray box, on a lower shelf, unlocked. Ruth knows the whole story. I told her everything, every piece, the very week I learned it, because I decided that day at the kitchen table that, whatever else I did with the rest of my life, I would not hand my daughter a locked box. When I go, there will be no key taped under a drawer. There will be no Margaret she never got to meet. She has the whole story, ugly parts and all, and do you know what she said when I finished telling her, over the phone, both of us crying 2,000 miles apart? She said, "Mom, I'm so glad you told me while I can still hold your hand." While I can still hold your hand. That is the whole thing. That is everything I have to give you. The people you love are still here where you can hold their hands. The box is still on the shelf where you can take it down. The truth is heavy and the saying of it is hard, and I promise you as a woman who has now buried a son and a husband and a sister I only got to keep for a little while, I promise you it is not as heavy as the waiting. Take down the box. Say the words. Do not make them find the key when you are gone. I still go to the town where Harold grew up, even now, even with Margaret gone. There is a bench in the little garden behind the care home, under a maple that turns the color of fire every October. And I sit there, and I talk to both of them out loud, and I do not care who hears an old woman talking to the air. I tell them about the tomatoes. I tell them Ruth is coming for Christmas this year, all of them. The grandchildren, too. I tell Harold that I forgive him, which I do, completely, and that I understand, which is harder but also true. And I tell Margaret, thank you, for standing in front of the fire, for taking the belt, for teaching a frightened little boy how to love, even if she taught him a little too well. And then I sit in the quiet, in the 2-hour town, under the burning tree, and I let the silence be full instead of empty for once. Because that is the last thing the letters taught me, the thing Harold spent 30 years learning, and I learned in one long night on the edge of a bed. Silence is not the same as peace. A quiet man is not an empty man. And the words you do not say do not disappear. They wait for you. In a box, on a shelf, in the hands of the people who loved you and deserved to know you all the way down. I found a key I had never seen the morning I buried my husband. I thought it was going to break my heart, and it did. But it also gave me a sister, and a Saturday, and a reason to say the true thing while there is still a hand to hold. So take down your box. I am begging you. Take it down today.